Does anybody, any other member wishes to speak?
Yes.
A member for West Bay North.
It won't be that long. Mr. Speaker, I rise to make a short contribution on the bill that is currently before this Honorable House. Mr. Speaker, since yesterday I've listened to everyone, and one of the first notes that I made was when the opposition leader reflected on his political journey since 2000. And it led me to think about my journey. Back then, I was just a 37-year-old, and hard to believe it, I actually had hair. Mr. Speaker, as you may recall, the 2000 election was based on the policies and performances of the national team government. And the mood back then was that they were too controlled by big businesses and special interest groups. The people back then, and I should say our people, as that is what they are, and we must never lose sight of this. Our people in particular, and in this case the people of West Bay, wanted representation that they believe would have their best interests at heart. And as such, my campaign slogan was simple: not for sale and not for rent. Mr. Speaker, as you may recall, yourself and my friend, and he's like a brother to me, my colleague from Bordentown West, convinced me to come and join the CDP. And his reasoning was that despite their shortcomings in the CDP was still the party for families that were seeking a better life in our country. After much discussion with people close to me and many others of whom I respected, I made the decision to join the CDP family and was made to feel welcome by a lot of people, and I want to say thanks for that. Mr. Speaker, in 2013, we had the belief that the CDP was the better way forward, and while we were unsuccessful at the polls during my first term, between the years 2013 and 17, we fulfilled our duty in this honorable House as required by the Constitution to hold the government to account. I consider many members in this House, regardless of where they sit, to be my friend. In some cases, I consider them extended family and mentors. And least we forget we are all Caymanians and call this little bit of paradise our home. Last weekend, when I received a copy of the legal opinion that was obtained by the CPR group, and let me let this straight. I've never had a meeting with the CPR group, never attended any of their meetings. I sat back and I go by what my people in my area expect of me. But of course, it would be wrong and remiss of me not to take what they sent me. I circulated to a few young people to ask their opinions. I will admit, the four of the young people that I circulated to were lawyers that I and other members of this House hold in high esteem. Mr. Speaker, within a few hours, 11 of the 17 persons that I circulated opinion to responded. Yesterday, 4 more responded, and last night I got the final 2. I know that they are following the proceedings of this House, and I want to thank them for all their feedback and in some cases their very blunt opinions. In short, Mr. Speaker, none of them was in favor of the building of the pier, which I disagreed with some of them straight out. And the general tone was that they they very much intend to campaign against the pair and anyone who supports the pair. One of them said to me, "Mr. B, you know we all have a lot of time for you, but we feel that this island is being sold out and nothing will be left for us or our children." Mr. Speaker, what really hit home to me was that 7 of them even spoke about getting a UK passport and moving there to a much better life. Mr. Speaker, leaving this beautiful paradise to that God-forsaken place, I would not advise anyone of that. Mr. Speaker, I won't lie. It hurt me to hear them say that. I now have to ask myself, who are we developing for? Maybe one of the questions that my colleague from Georgetown Central should add to his survey is how many people believe that Cayman has a bright future for them. But Mr. Speaker, what was of even greater concern to every single one of them was the conduct of us, or they should say the government. Many of them believe that the efforts of the government gave them pause, and they questioned the government's commitment to upholding the democratic principles that we are all elected to protect and promote. Once again, I would say this is the opinion of the 17 young people who are all educated and all I wanted their opinion of. I told them I agreed with what the Premier said when he said that the names should be verified. I have no problem with that, because if I was sitting where the Premier was sitting, I would want it verified. Everyone should want that. Common sense should tell us that. But they all said that the attack on members of the CPR group left a bad taste in their mouth. Mr. Speaker, I can say that sometimes this can go both ways. But these young people were also concerned with the following: the decision-making process and the perceived influence being exercised by the crew's representatives and other foreign parties. Of the 17 people, 15 stated this. The lack of information from the government, and not to mention the amount of misinformation the government appeared to be putting out there. The opaqueness of the government business case, and very importantly, the updated environmental impact study one would expect from such a major infrastructure project. And personally, Mr. Speaker, this is my main concern. We'll get to that later. The scale of the government effort and resources being directed to the public to fight this, and that is not fair to the group that does not want it. In short, they were not impressed with how the government have been conducting themselves. Mr. Speaker, I'm 56 years old. When I started this journey 19 years ago, I was a father of 2 wonderful children. Since that time, my daughter Shakeen has become a school teacher at West Bay Primary, and my son Akeem now flies the plane that Mr. Miller mentioned yesterday, the biggest aircraft in the world, the 380-800 for the Emirates, and lives in Dubai. Mr. Speaker, I can tell you firsthand that I saw the process that my son went through when he made the decision to leave Cayman to better his career in aviation. And that is why I can relate to these young people who are talking about going to make it better in the UK. But Mr. Speaker, something else happened between my first election and in 2000 today. I became a grandfather, and another one expecting in January. I now understand when people say that they knew, if they knew grandchildren were so much fun, they would have had them first. It's true. And I wish grandchildren on everyone. Mr. Speaker, you're also a grandfather, like myself and others in this House. It changes your perspective. It changes your outlook. It means that we have been blessed to see our family tree extend to another generation. And that inspires us to keep fighting for our islands, not just for today, but for tomorrow, where our grandchildren and other grandchildren will have a better Cayman when they grow up. We are humbly reminded of this in John 14:3, When Jesus said, I go to prepare a place for you, and that is what we should be doing in this house. Preparing not anything for ourselves, should not be preparing for the billion-dollar cruise industry, should not be preparing for those select businesses, but to prepare for our future generations of Caymanians so that they too will be able to call Cayman a paradise in their home. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to be alive to see a group of people come together and exercise their democratic rights in trying to shape the future of our islands. Those democratic principles are what made the Cayman Islands what it is today. It reminds me of Miss Georgette and those people when they went for the women's right to vote. Our people didn't advocate violence or civil disobedience, which we know is currently ongoing around the world. Look at Hong Kong, look at France. Instead, they gave up their time, their efforts, and their sweat in advocating for what they think is right and what is wrong with that. Mr. Speaker, isn't that the right many people around the world died to ensure that many of us have today? How can we forget this, especially as Remembrance Sunday is almost upon us? Mr. Speaker, the rules of this Legislative Assembly does not allow us to question motives of members. Why then should we sit in this House and question the motives of people that we were elected to serve? I know that in addition to being political leaders and representatives, that we are also humans, and we put on our pants one foot at a time like everyone else. However, Mr. Speaker, none of us in this House have the right to use the platform that we were given to abuse our people and question their motives. We are expected to behave in a manner that is reflective of the office that we were elected to serve. Mr. Speaker, as I listened to the debates yesterday and today, I have yet to figure out why so much political capital is being used on this project, but nothing for our people who are living paycheck to paycheck, and some people are not living with any check at all. Mr. Speaker, I couldn't help but wonder why this project wasn't pushed from the last term. And I sat back and I looked and I said, well, with Minister Panton and Minister Archer, I guess it would have been hard to bring it through. Mr. Speaker, I knew joining the CDP that you supported building the pier. You have never, ever hidden that. You've never jumped around and said this or said that. You've been consistent all the way through. And I have always admired the fact that you've never once told me how to vote, despite being wrongfully portrayed as a dictator. Never once in the 4 years have you tried to tell me what to do. As a matter of fact, even in the last referendum bill that came before this House back in 2012, one of your own ministers voted against it, as you allowed for a conscience vote on this issue. I too am asking the Premier to please allow a conscience vote. Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition pointed out yesterday that this current PPM-led government did not have a mandate. That has been hashed over and over, and I will not even go near that. I must also admit, Mr. Speaker, that I am disappointed that we will not have an opportunity to know how the people we were elected to serve in the districts of West Bay and other sections would have voted as per what is contained in the bill. I really hope that the Premier and his government amend this section as the bill, because I have concerns about the count as proposed. A scenario where ballot boxes are transported in the night to be counted is not reflective of a free and democratic country. We should never ever put our elections in any scenario where anyone has doubts, and the fact that ballots from Cayman Brac and Little Cayman will have to travel by plane to Grand Cayman before the votes can be counted is not a scenario that we should have entertained. We have always counted at the polling stations, and I don't know why that should change now. Mr. Speaker, I'm also deeply concerned that despite the promises of how many jobs this port will create, I have not heard any member of the government side speak about what will happen to the many Caymanians' jobs that will be lost. What will happen to those Caymanians? Are we not concerned about them? Mr. Speaker, has the government stopped to ask the question or consider that the proposed crude berthing facility will destroy Kimanian-owned business for the benefit of multi-billion-dollar corporations like the cruise lines? We know about the jobs that are promised us after giving concessions. The perfect example, look at the Ritz. Go down there and see how many Kimanians you can find. Mr. Speaker, what I feel we should be fighting for, just like when you have children, you have to protect them from themselves. Maybe we have to protect the people in our cruise industry here in Kiman, because we know what goes on, Mr. Speaker. The cruise lines play us against each other, and where we should be getting $25 a head, they give one set $15 a head, and the next year they go to somebody else and say, I'll give you $10 a head, and they just keep constantly cutting each other down till we are getting nothing. Maybe it's time for the government to set in and say, guess what? We will run the show. We will run the show. And this is what you'll pay. These are the kind of things I feel we should be doing. But it's only me. Now, in kind of closing up, Mr. Speaker, some of the things that stood out. In the report that the Honorable Premier read, I kept hearing the word unlikely. Unlikely. These experts are saying it's unlikely it would affect this area. It's unlikely it would. Mr. Speaker, I've seen 3 spots. 2 I can show people can go see it right now, the Marriott, and the second one is at Bogisan Road right behind where I was born and grew up, where something was trouble and the beach just started to move and it's gone. We have to get an assurance, because the financial industry can leave this country at the drop of a click on a computer. And the fact that the great mother country we have called the UK and the United States does not in any way or form wish this little island well. If they could bury us tomorrow, they would. And that is something that everybody hushes about, but nobody wants to say it in the public. We have to take care of our tourism product. It's the one thing that we have. I sit and I listen, and then I hear talk about the great coral replanting. I look around this room, and I wonder how many in this room has ever gone and dive out in that Hogstye Bay or dive out in that harbor. I have. Danny Soto, Randy Soto, Joey Jackson, myself, used to be out there every day, every weekend. When you hear them talking about picking up these pan shores, Mr. Speaker, you have some pan shore heads out there that's bigger or just as big as this room. So that won't be growing back right now. So when I hear those things, it makes me worry. Another major concern is, Mr. Speaker, the EIA, and this is where I have my major problem, is from 2015. This is 2019, and the plans have changed 2 or 3 times since 2015. So the EIA should be done over before this is done. We cannot take a chance. We cannot take a chance, I repeat, on our environment. Well, that's 7 Mile Beach. There's 2 things we know we have: Stingray City, the diving, and the 7 Mile Beach. If that 7 Mile Beach goes, then guess what? We will be the cause of it. Mr. Speaker, in our Constitution, Section 44(3) says The Cabinet shall have responsibility for the formulation of policy, including directing the implementation of such policy insofar as it relates to every aspect of government except those matters for which the government has special responsibility under Section 55. And the Cabinet shall be collectively responsible to the Legislative Assembly for such policies and their implementations. I have sat over here. It's been uncomfortable, but I want to give the Premier all the respect and thanks. Right where he's sitting, the day down there that he marked off 2 other names and put my name on the PAC committee. It's a committee that I've come to really enjoy being on. You learn a lot. And it's a decent crew of people that we work with. And it's for the second time I've been under the chairmanship of the member from Northside. 4 years on the Oversight Committee for the Complaints Commissioner's Office, and then for these last 2.5 years on the PAC. And it's only one time I can ever say that he was wrong about it. All those 6 years, I would say he was wrong once about something. But his leadership, his consistency, I will always appreciate and say thanks. Mr. Speaker, when the Premier gave me that post, I wanted to stay there. And that was the reason why I stayed over here. I'm just being truthful. I sat with the member from Savannah on many times and took guidance, his advice, and he has been my sounding post for the last 2 years. And Mr. Speaker, I did not want, and the Premier even went so far as tried to get me to be a councillor. But the one person he approached said no. Can't blame him. When you know someone is below you but knows more, that would make you uncomfortable, I guess, if you're not secure. Unlike what the Minister for Works, in a very good speech. I'm hoping that the public listened to Minister Hugh. Of all the speeches that I heard from this side, was very, very fair, and I thought opened a lot of eyes on, should open eyes on people on some things, how it's done. And I will say thank you for him for opening my eyes on a few issues. But, Mr. Speaker, like I said, I want to say to the Premier that there's a quote, and I cannot remember it off by heart, something about when you, to be politically correct, to be safe and things like that. But sometimes at the end of the day, regardless of all of those, you must follow your conscience. And to put any uncomfortableness aside, when I sit down, I'll be moving across to sit over by the Minister from Savannah, and I want to say to the Premier, thank you very much for the position you put me in. I guess if I go across there, I would probably lose the post on the PSC, but if that is so, that is so. But thanks very much. And to the people, I will say this. I cannot, like other people, backtrack. My people in West Bay North that I've contacted, and I've contacted since this came out, over 150. Only 2 have said yes. The rest have clearly said no. And even some people who drive buses have said no. I cannot, at this time with a clear conscience, take a chance that I could be a part of the destruction of the environment. The father and grandfather in me does not allow me the luxury of compromising my principles, so I will end just as how I began 19 years ago. I will say, I'm not for sale and I'm not for rent. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? I don't think Captain's speaking. I don't think he's speaking.